Hello, everyone. Sorry, I had the little countdown back there for when the recording started, which I guess I should stand here-ish for a second so the recording can see me for at least a part of it. For those of you who somehow don't know me by this point in this room, I am Hunter Stuckemeyer, or as Tuan calls me, Heather now. So if you're talking to Tuan, I'm Heather. Just keep him confused for me, please. This is the second part of trauma-informed teaching. So if you missed the first part, that's completely fine. We'll have a mini recap, but not a full in-depth recap. Sorry, this is the part that's always awkward for me because I don't use slides very often when I teach. But this is what we're doing today. The first part was we were talking about trauma and what is trauma. And then this part is now the part where we brainstorm what to do about it. Note the word brainstorm. I am not the be-all, end-all answers for taking a trauma-informed teaching approach. I am just a person who has read a bunch of books, really like it, and really try to implement it in my courses. So the two objectives for today, a little bit of goal setting, is we're going to identify ways to be mindful and engaged in trauma-informed teaching, and we're going to define and recognize compassion fatigue. Has anyone heard of compassion fatigue before? Cool, you're in for a really fun thing. So our agenda is we're going to have a quick recap and activity. We're going to talk about compassion fatigue. I know my objectives were out of order for anyone who gets neurotic about that. I am right now. And then moving forward, what can we do in our practices? So we're going to start with the activity. And your buddy left you. So for this activity, it is something that when we start talking more about trauma-informed practices will make sense. Oh, good, your buddy's back just in time. Like, you almost missed the part where you needed the buddy. And as I tell my students, make sure you have your exit buddy, because if for some reason something goes wrong during the activity or we're working together, make sure that you get each other out. They think it's funny because they all are up to date on Finding Nemo. But with that being said, this is going to be an activity that is slightly challenging because it is going to require absolute silence, which you're already giggling, which is going to be the hard part. But we're going to try to embrace the silence. And what we're going to do is you're going to draw the person sitting with you in a very specific way. Don't worry about your art skills because you're not going to be looking at the page, you're going to be looking at the person. So whatever comes out at the end, even if it's a blob, that is perfect because it's still targeting the intention that I have for this practice. I'm going to let Dana come in and then can I have you three draw each other? Yep. Just in time. So I don't know if you want to do, sorry, I'm assigning you a spot.
No, that's fine.
So each of you are going to pick a person to stare at. All right. So to start off, and I promise we will get to introductions because I think most of us know each other and some of us don't. But make sure your pencil and your paper are in front of you. You can move all the other stuff aside for a moment and lay your pen or pencil on your paper. Let it go. You can have your hands in your lap. You can have them on the table. If you feel safe with the people around you, feel free to close your eyes. If you do not feel perfectly safe or you're kind of like nervous, you can leave your eyes open. Just pick a spot in front of you on the table to stare at. And pull yourself up. So as if you were being a puppet and your head was being pulled up by a string. Just trust the process. So the first thing you're going to do is take a deep breath in, and then you're going to let it out as slow as you can. Then you're going to take another breath in, as slow as you can. Let that breath out again, as slow as you can. Keep breathing as deeply and slowly as you can. Try to tune out the voices in the next room. Very softly start moving your fingers and your toes. If your eyes are open, you can remove your soft focus. If they're closed, open them again. And then you're going to pick up your pen, your dominant hand, and you're going to look at the person sitting with you. And without lifting your pen, you're going to try to draw the person that you see sitting with you without lifting your pen.
Look at the paper or no?
You don't look at the paper, look at the person. So as quietly as you can, sit and look at the person and draw them as best without looking at them, without looking at your paper, without lifting the pen. Just think about what shape does their nose have? Do they wear glasses? Is their hair curly? Is it short? Do they have a beard? No beard? Can you see their ears? So as best you can without looking at the paper. Some of us cheat. The first couple of times I did this, I cheated quite a bit. Don't look at the paper. As best you can, just look at the person. All right. If you pick up your pen, just pick up as best you can. So as quietly as you can, draw without looking at the paper. If you cheat, it's fine. It happens. All right, I'm going to give you another couple of seconds. You can slowly start putting down your pencil or your pen. And it's okay if you cheated, because it happens. The first couple of times I did this, I cheated quite a bit. Also, learning how to not pick up your pen, not easy. That is so hard. All right. All right, so now with your partner, you're going to ask them their name if you don't know them, maybe what department they're from, and talk about how it felt to just be quiet and to have to do a task while being quiet that you may not feel that you're very good at if you don't feel like you're good at art. Or if you feel like you're great at art, it's still challenging. So, introduce yourself to your buddy.
Sam. Yeah.
English.
What's the department you in? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, we do. We're on the other side of the building, or on the other side of the street.
This was very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, this was interesting.
I actually did use, but
Wasn't that-
I was looking at
I am not.
I got this, I got this.
I am selected.
Because I knew it was.
So, cheating wouldn't have happened much. Honestly, yeah, no, like, oh, I got some eye shapes in it that kind of look like eyes. I could have started a little
I
bit
was
bigger.
very conscious of that part.
Yeah. We're not looking at it.
Yeah, you remember where you
So
are.
big, too.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a perfect for the sound.
Yeah, and then you start way too small.
Yeah.
No, it's, yeah.
It's really hard to do.
It's interesting.
So,
It gets easier. It gets easier.
Yeah, you only have to draw it down one page.
Right.
Oh, I know what this is.
I almost took it over.
I do these personality.
It's close.
Yeah. I don't. Well, this one
It is kind of-
I just was like, when you do the traditional, it's very much like, if you cheat or
How do you feel about
Yeah,
that?
it's not that environment.
Yeah, I'm
This is
used
more of a
to-
mindfulness
You
rather
know,
than.
being this far away from the paper and drawing every detail, super close, not looking at it as something different. That's fun. I have a tendency to handwrite a lot when I'm not looking at the
I
page.
love, I never did.
So at least that.
So that was nice.
But, you know, you gotta put that in.
It's
Very
feedback.
Yeah. No, I
Because it was so hard to concentrate on this and then also try to hear what she
That's
said.
good feedback for next time.
Cursive.
So my students require me to
And
have
my
more,
sister.
and then different groups require
They
different
do it
things.
all.
So that was one of
So
the
now I know.
It's gonna be like a
in
special
different
code
group,
for us old
last
people.
one.
We'll be able to write cursive all scratchy when we get older and then we'll be able to read it.
All right, do you know your partner's name at least?
There's no-
You know your partner's name? You know your partner's name?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So I want you to hold up your picture and introduce the person that you drew. We'll start at this table.
Gotcha. So this is Sam. This is, he's the chair of the horticulture department. He draws landscaping a lot, but he's not an artist.
Yeah.
But I do.
As you can tell from this is Nick, it's in behavioral sciences. Yeah, I definitely got an artist. Technical drawings, sure. But yeah, not so much.
The point isn't whether or not you're an artist or not for this exercise. The point is more your ability to sit in silence and do the task. Would you guys like to go next?
Sure. This is Chris. She's an English professor.
And I did Terry, I picked up my fun, so I was trying not to cheat. And Terry's in the education department.
My partner is Dana, who teaches in the engineering program. And I hope it's okay that I say this, but it was so funny, because you said, don't pick up the pens, and we were like, huh, how do we do this?
Don't pick up the,
Don't pick up the pen.
Good feedback for me for next time.
We were both
Good feedback for me for next time. I appreciate that, because learning is all about, teaching is all about learning how to teach.
Yeah.
Which is weird to say because you're teaching, but you're like, I'm learning how to teach as I'm teaching.
So
Appreciate it.
that was funny.
Yes. Sorry, I interrupted your introductions.
That's okay, I think that's all I have. Oh, I did that too.
My partner was Susan, professional development on it. I think it's fascinating. We all have the the excuse for not being an artist of it, but I also thought about my students with that. I'm not a builder. I don't know how to do these, like the number of excuses they give being quiet. But, no, we're building.
All right, well, I'm sorry you guys came in late, but would you mind introducing yourselves?
I'm Stacy, at English.
Sure, I'm Mary. I'm one of the counselors. Nice to meet you.
So how often have you heard your students say, I'm not blank?
Today or?
Yeah. I did 2 classes of draft review today.
But other times,
Or I'm not good at this, or I can't do this. I mean, Sam, you have thoughts?
Not often.
You're lucky.
I honestly think they come into horticulture because it's something that a lot of people haven't delved into yet. So they know that they have no prior knowledge. So I'm literally starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Vocabulary words are all brand new, insect orders are all brand new, like it's all brand new. So they don't really have a lot of preconceived expectations of themselves to be able to do something, which is kind of nice. So they do get frustrated in the landscape design process. I'll say that. So.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Anyone have any stories that they want to share of a student being like, I'm not this? And it's fine if you don't.
Again, the landscape design, I have a lot of people in that class. There's 10 students in there. There are a couple that have a little bit of landscape experience. There are several that have art experience, but not landscape design experience. So they're used to just drawing freeform. Now you have to pick a scale to draw. What does 1H equal? 8 feet, 4 feet, 12 feet, what are you doing? How big is this plant? What exactly are these? How do you draw the symbols? So when they have to do the technical side, they have the picture in their head, and rather than just be able to draw it, there's constraints. So then they get frustrated. And I have it in my head, I can't get it on the paper. And it's a lot of erasing and start from scratch. So and having been there at one point, I flat out told them, yeah, you're going to hate most of what you do. Just the way it's going to go. You're going to draw something, and you're not going to like it. You're going to try to refine it, and you're going to throw it away and start over. That's the process until you figure out how this works and how you need to get that picture out of your head. It's just the way it's going to go. And
oh, absolutely. And part of the problem is like we see so many, and especially now with like TikTok reels and social media, and all of a sudden you watch people doing these watercolor like things, and they're building these beautiful landscapes and pictures and drawings and designs. And it's really easy for one of the things, and I tell students they're not allowed to say that they're not an artist because art comes in many ways, shapes, or forms. So if they want to go on a strike system with me where they get strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, that is the quickest way to start that strike system. And I tell them, you don't want to know what happens when it comes to 3. I also don't know what happens when they get to 3, by the way. No one has made it that far. But funny enough, I learned this in a set design class, which I feel like probably has a lot of similarities with measurement and knowing the space. So I actually learned this first in a set design class. And the intention was very different than the intention I'm using now, which was the intention for this one was to practice mindfulness. Has anyone heard that term before? Is anyone sick of that term? Because whenever I hear that word, I go, oh God. But then I remember that it's actually good for my brain, which is the back and forth that I go with it. Like I hate the word, I like the things. But also to sit in silence, especially when you hear, like that was not an ideal setup for today with having, but how did sitting in silence feel? Other than the fact I talk too much. I'm sorry.
I don't get enough quiet, so for me, I was like, so.
Any other reactions to sitting in silence? You guys did very well over there sitting in silence. Like you two did not break at all. How did it feel?
It was good. It was nice.
Good.
A lot of individual hairs.
Yes. You gotta get the beard. Like that is.
the shine, and the shine off the top of that.
This is not to make anyone feel self-conscious about themselves, so that
It's there,
happens.
it's fine.
Any other?
Yeah, I thought the quiet was nice, because I never get quiet. But also, there was nice eye contact, so I felt like she was communicating, it's just an exercise, no stress. I don't know if that's what she was communicating, but that's what I took from her.
Yeah, so this was built in mindfulness, and we'll get to mindfulness throughout this, and also we'll talk more about silence and finding moments to teach people to be okay with silence, because I know I'm still working on it, because if there's a silent moment, guess what I'm doing? Can't stop running my mouth. So, sorry, this is the thing, because this is why I don't use slides, is because I always end up in a different position in the room. I should have asked for the remote.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe. Oh, it's right here. But, so last time we talked about trauma and what is trauma. And Nick, you weren't here, but I feel like you probably have a good definition of trauma. Do you have a definition you can share?
I don't have a succinct one off the top of my head.
That's all right.
It maybe events or patterns in people's lives that cause patterns in the future. Mostly all the trauma is negative, I guess, negative patterns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhat there.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's the lifelong effect after something happens. So last time we talked about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, where there is a list, and if you want the PowerPoint from last time, if you weren't here, feel free to ask me for it, but it lists 10 adverse childhood experiences from neglect to seeing a parent incarcerated, and the number of events that happen in a child's life leads to, they call it the ACEs score. At the end of the day, it's trauma. And we all have things in our life that happen, and I'm going to guess at least one of us in this room, outside of myself, because I know myself, maybe a little too well sometimes, has had a traumatic event happen in their lives. Whether or not, I don't know all of your personal backgrounds and stories, but that being said, I know that there's at least something that's happened. And when we have a group of students, we know when they come in, there's going to be at least one person who's had something happen. So when we're talking about trauma in and of itself, it's an event that has caused an ongoing series in your mind. That's a terrible way to reframe it. Go through my slides if you want a better definition. But does that help set the tone for this next part? Okay. So trauma-informed teaching is not meant to take a person's trauma and go, you're cured from taking my class. Because if we could do that, then I think we could just have a bunch of people walking around society being like, you're cured, and it would work. But there's not a magic button that does that. Trauma-informed teaching instead takes the lens of understanding that people have trauma. Now, how do I, as an educator, educate you, understanding that I'm not going to know your entire past? Some students will very freely share it. Some students will hold it in a locked iron chest, wrapped in chains, 7 oceans deep within their soul. So you're never going to fully know, but understanding that everyone comes in with something really changes a little bit of the mindset and practices. I will also say using a trauma-informed lens coincidentally helps students with ADHD, because a lot of the techniques that we use to help one group helps both. So you could also say you're being a neurodiverse inclusive teacher. 2 for 1. Did I sell you? All right, so I have this nice video that explains it in a much more eloquent way than I did.
If you're fearful, if you're anxious, if you're distracted about something that's happened to you or your family, you literally can't learn. Your brain shuts down. It's essential to give kids social and emotional tools to go with their intellectual tools.
When they walk through the door, they don't leave everything that has happened at the door. They bring it with them. Operating a trauma-informed approach is the understanding that we have to be able to help them manage their experiences in productive ways.
Having that lens makes it less about are they doing the right thing or the wrong thing, and more about where is that behavior coming from, why is that happening, what can we do about that.
Schools are powerful places. That's why it's so important as educators that we don't contribute to the trauma that many of our young people experience day in and day out. It is our responsibility to ensure that schools are places of healing, places where our students can thrive.
How was school today? Good. Class been okay?
Yep.
Okay.
We're going to share a high and a low experience. Last week, my anxiety started coming back really bad, so I've just been learning how to cope with that.
It feels frustrating for me, and I have to take a breath, catch myself.
We just struggle a lot in my math class.
when a strong relationship exists with a teacher, with a mentor, with an advisor, it actually can reverse the effects of the adverse experiences. Children are amazingly resilient if they get that opportunity for attachment, for comfort, and for problem solving with a caring adult.
Good morning, Jolene. We're glad you're here.
So obviously we're doing, we'll get to this in a second, but I just didn't want to see the video behind me because then I was going to be distracted by that. We're working with college students. And a lot of what we know about trauma-informed teaching does still come from K through 12 schools. However, they're coming to us, a lot of them are coming to us straight from 12th grade. A lot of them are coming from having been in the field for a long time. And either way, in my personal anecdotal experience, I found that it works for whether they're a returning student. I don't like the term that is applied to them where it's like, I can't remember the term that's applied to them, but where it's like adult learner or something. I can't remember what it is, where it's like after they've been in the field for a while. That's all right. The point is that I don't like it, so that's why I removed it from my brain. Just wiped it. Or if they're coming straight from high school, in my anecdotal experience, using a trauma-informed approach has worked for both groups. But moving into, so before we start talking about how to use trauma-informed approach, one of the drawbacks is something called compassion fatigue. And I know a lot of you had said that you hadn't heard of compassion fatigue before, but essentially it is exactly how it sounds. It is becoming exhausted and burnt out from providing compassionate, empathetic care all the time. This started in the health services and has, through a variety of ways, started leaking in to other domains as well. But it fits very well because we're working with people. And people, I mean, as much as I'd love for the students to come in with their backpacks on nice and neat, put down their notebooks, be ready to learn, that also removes the beauty of working with people because everyone comes in differently. You've got one kid throwing their backpack on the floor and then sitting down in a chair 5 feet away from it, to be honest. But you know then that they come with their own personality and their own being. But compassion fatigue, this is not as big as I want it to be because it's smaller, but a lot of it does attribute to burnout. So the last time we talked in trauma about how you can be traumatized from hearing other people's stories. Because after a while, it starts weighing on your mental load. And I'm not saying turn your students away at the door. What I'm saying is like keep an eye out for the fact that sometimes, especially when you have a student who, and right now I'm battling this myself. This semester I have a student who is living in her car. She is food scarce. She is struggling to keep up with the assignments and the homework. She's going actively to counseling. However, at the end of the day, there's still a large part of her that is, because of these things, weighing on me, because I know as an educator, I can't go to her and provide her a house. I can share snacks with her and I can share resources with her, but it's still, at the end of the day, it weighs on me heavier than I would like it to weigh on me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night going, oh my God, what else can I do? But at the end of the day, I've so far given her everything I have. So when you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night stressing about your students, that might be a sign of compassion fatigue. If you're thinking about them first thing in the morning, when you get up, when you're working out, when you're in the shower, might be a little too invested in their life at that point. And I'm not saying don't be empathetic to their situation, don't share the resources for their situation, but just watch that for yourself because you still have to have your life and your boundaries. Mary, you're in the counseling center. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, there's definitely resources for us as professionals because these students do become part of us. And so even though we are counselors in the counseling center, we work with our students. We don't work with our colleagues. So I encourage you to call the EAP provider, Perspectives, will be changing its name in January, but call that number and sometimes just share your story, and especially, you know, because again, I think we've all had that experience at least once, and it just feels so good. The word counseling we use is unpack, to just unpack all of your thoughts and whatever, and with somebody who is not going to be judgmental, who is not going to tell you what to do or make you feel that you should do more or you're doing too much. You just need to just unpack those thoughts. Because at the end of the day, that's one student in one class, and you're teaching usually 5 classes at your class. So it's a lot of brain space to take up for that. But always please refer the students to counseling. You cannot mandate counseling, you can encourage them. You can send us an email if you include them on the email. We are happy to, that's why I was late, because somebody walked in and at 2:58 I had to decide, am I going to Hunter's presentation, which I really wanted to be here, or do I have to work with the students? So like I said, we're happy to work with them and help them find resources. And because our students are so complicated, you know, having someone that's unhoused in a class, and especially as it's getting colder, it's already all the shelters have opened up. They all opened up October 1st. So we can help them find temporary places to stay. We can give them numbers, but I'll tell you, the waiting list to get into some place is going to be years. So we can help them with some temporary things that they can find, as well as literally the wall on my office is part of Tremont. So we can give them food, you know, for at least cover a couple of meals a day.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that she's doing. Is she's using our counseling center. She's using Troy Mart. At least she's telling me that. And she even told me which therapist she's using. And I'm like, I don't need to double check on you there. I also feel like that might be some kind of violation. And that's my extreme like case this semester, where I've had other cases where it's less extreme, where I teach early childhood and they have placements. And sometimes their observation sites are where they work. And sometimes those sites aren't ideal. So then I'm sitting up at night thinking about how can I get the student into a different center, but they work full time and they need that paycheck, so they can't leave that center. So what do we do from there unless they apply for a new job, and then they have to still complete their assignments and all of these things and still meet those expectations, but I'm just burning myself out. I'm a hamster on a wheel going in circles in my brain, and that is what compassion fatigue looks like. And it ends up causing this barrier in your head where you're like, you're burnt out because you're burning yourself out on these 1 or 2 students. And I'm not saying don't be empathetic, but when you start seeing those things, and I talk to my therapist about this sometimes, and sometimes we get to the end of the session and she's like, do you want to talk about yourself for 5 minutes? And I'm like, oh, I guess I do exist. And need to talk about myself. So it's still healthy to talk about it, but when you find yourself awake in the middle of the night, you might be thinking a little bit too much about that student. Does that make sense? Also, if you want to know if you have compassion fatigue, there's a link to a questionnaire. I know Angela in her session yesterday printed off a questionnaire, but I felt with doing both the mindfulness activity and a questionnaire might be too much. Also, like, what if you didn't want to take the questionnaire? So if you want to take it, it's in the slides. I'll have Laura send it out. So moving forward, how do you take care of yourself when you find yourself awake in the middle of the night thinking about these students? Mindfulness is every time I Googled it, it was like mindfulness. That was like the #1 thing is practice mindfulness exercises, practice, sitting and meditating. Has anyone tried meditating? Is anyone good at meditating?
It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
It takes a lot.
I really have to.
The best thing that I've never done, and I've only done it once, and I tend to do it more often, is go into somewhere that has a sensory deprivation tank. That was the best thing, because if I'm in an environment, it doesn't matter where I am, I'm going to listen to everything and pick up everything and try to figure out what noises. I can't sit
Right.
and not, it won't stop.
No, it is a hamster on a wheel,
Yeah.
right? Like it just keeps going.
It's
And
just over-analysis about the human mind.
exactly. So I'm saying this not as someone who's perfect at practicing mindfulness, but is trying to, because I know on days where I at least try to practice it, some days I feel better, some days I don't, because some days I'm like sitting, have you ever heard of leaves on a stream? It's where you're sitting and you're imagining yourself putting every thought as a leaf into a stream and watching it go. Sometimes for me, those leaves are on fire, and that's all I can think about is like, I can't let go of the sleep because it's on fire, and everything around me is burning, and I'm stressed. So that tells you how mindfulness goes sometimes. That is how it goes sometimes. The next thing is like listen to your limitations, which does come from learning to listen to your brain in a helpful way, not the doomsday thinking brain where it's like, hey, if you don't pay your taxes on time, you're going to get this thing, or if you don't do this one thing on time, you know, like the doomsday thinking. But listen to your limitations. For example, if you can't do a 500-pound squat, should you be doing a 500-pound squat? No, you should not. So in the same way of like doing a 500-pound squat when you cannot do a 500-pound squat, if you're unable to do something, listen to it, because you may have to learn how to do it instead of just trying to divide and conquer it. Or you may have to honor that and be like, that is something that's not in my wheelhouse. So if your student is calling you at 2 a.m. in the morning, you need sleep, right? That is a physical limitation that you have. And if for some reason you do not need sleep and you are one of those people who be up at 2 a.m. partying, good for you, because I lost that ability when I was 12. It's not a partier in college, just saying. That was not me. I had a hard 10 a.m. bedtime. Set your PM. Yeah. You said AM. AM? I was in bed. You know, to be fair, I did take naps in college and went to bed at 7 p.m. So it still applies. I was in bed by 10 a.m. and I was in bed by 10 p.m. Couldn't sign up for that 10 a.m. class time. I was right either way, but thank you. Set boundaries. So how do you prevent that student from calling you at 2 a.m.? Don't have a policy where you let them call you at 2 a.m. and don't answer the first time they call you at 2 a.m. For myself, because I am responsive on email and responsive on Blackboard, that is the only communication I give students. I know other professors do give students their cell phone numbers because of their policy on checking their things. But for me, I know that I check this within a certain time frame all the time within the week. Like 8 to 5, I am on Monday through Friday for you. But once 5 o'clock on Friday hits, you will not hear from me until Monday morning. And that is something that my first year teaching I did not do, was answering emails Saturday evening. And after that year, and my husband was like, I would like to see you. I realized I had to set that boundary for myself because I was just fatiguing myself in anticipation that someone had a problem. And once I started putting in my syllabus, will not answer emails after 5 p.m. And will not answer emails on a weekend. Students who email me on the weekend now say, when you come in on Monday morning, please let me know. And I'm like, thank you, because they will respect that boundary when you set it and you enforce it. Even if they are the emotionally taxed ones. Like my student this semester will email me Sunday night, like 11 p.m. and say, hey, I know you won't see this till 8 a.m., but, so even she knows that that is a boundary I need to keep for myself to help her. And we've had those conversations where she's like, I like that you're available to help me, but you also take care of yourself. And I was like, oh, thank you. It's not easy because I'd rather I'm a people pleaser by nature. So it's very difficult. And evaluate your expectations. So if you're expecting a certain kind of student to come into your classroom, is that the realistic expectation? Or if you're expecting that because this one student did very well in one class, they're going to do the same in this other class, or if they did very poorly the first time they took your class, are you expecting that they will do poorly again in your class? So these are some ways to help prevent and manage if you find yourself in compassion fatigue. Just to think about how you're taking care of yourself. I know we all hear that where it's like, take care of yourself. And I'm going to stop talking there because I'm sure you've all heard it a million times. But also, because I care about, well, I met Nick like literally yesterday, but I care about you now that you've done my activity. Please take care of yourselves for me, if nothing else. All right. So moving from compassion fatigue back to a little bit more of trauma-informed teaching is set clear expectations for these students. Even though the student that I'm working with is having a myriad of problems, and at this point I don't expect her to pass with a great grade, she's still working on it, and I still have expectations of her to do the work and to not just be like, hey, this is a thing, because at the end of the day, we still have academic integrity, and that is something we still have to uphold. But setting those clear expectations of this is when I expect work to be submitted, this is when you are allowed to do revisions. So I know for me, it's within 2 weeks of receiving feedback. You have 2 weeks to revise, and that is my clear expectation that I make. So setting those clear expectations, setting clear boundaries. Like I said, you don't want a 2 a.m. phone call, but also you don't want a student walking in for the last 20 minutes of class and learning nothing. Like, you want them to be there and ready to learn. On the occasion that they are late, that should be the exception, not the rule. I was thinking about this girl in college where she would always show up for the last 20 minutes of our class. And I had no idea how she was going to pass that class. I still don't know if she passed that class, but as a student myself, I always would look at this girl who would show up and she'd go right to the front of the room. There were open seats in the back, mind you, so she could have picked any of the back seats, but she would march clear to the front and sit in the front row. Baffling to me as a student. Maybe she and the professor understood something about it, or maybe the professor was as confused as I was. No idea. And something to think about is teaching trauma is not the same as being trauma informed. So some of you might have to teach, does anyone have to teach trauma in their classes or have careers that you have trauma in them that you have to talk about? I know Terry does, but that's a different.
We do. We have lacerations and limb, losing limbs.
Yes. So teaching your students about what is trauma is not the same as being trauma informed. That makes sense. Yeah. All right, so in the classroom, I've heard variations of safe or brave spaces. Have you guys heard of safe and brave spaces? Yeah? So, anyone know the difference between a safe and a brave space? So a safe space is you want your students to feel safe in your classroom, and that's it. A brave space is where you want students to feel that they are capable of being engaged and capable of sharing their thoughts, even when they're in draft mode. Like, because let's be real, some of our students say things and like, this isn't going to sound right. It's draft mode. Like, you're drafting your new thoughts and opinions about it. So trying to encourage students to feel that they have a voice in the classroom, because a lot of times, especially with trauma, if you already feel that you are down and you have nothing to contribute, how much lower is that going to bring your soul? Like, so finding ways to participate. Teaching emotional regulation strategies. I know our job isn't to teach this. And even if it's just, because I've had days, I was surprised when I got to college, when I started teaching, not when I got to college, when I started teaching college and I was an adjunct, and how much they were like the toddlers I was teaching at the same time, because I was a 2-year-old teacher. And like halfway through the first semester, I was sitting there going, oh my God, like I have toddlers and I have toddlers, just based on their ability to emotionally regulate. And granted, that was that group of students. But I realized that I had to teach them how to professionally behave in the classroom. And some of that is part of that, where, hey, you have to manage your emotions enough to be in the classroom. One of the things, and I'm not saying I disagree with this on a large scale, but for my own practices, I disagree with this, is that the first syllabus I got at Triton was like, students shouldn't be leaving the classroom multiple times during class. And my first semester teaching here, I had a student walk out of class all the time. Well, he had ADHD, and he, like, something would, like, he would just get, like, impatient or something, and he had to leave to reset himself to come back. And if you're going to leave to reset yourself and come back as a professional, I would rather you do that than sit in my classroom spiraling in your own frustration. And I was lucky because when I asked him about it, because I'm like, hey, my syllabosis is this, but like, are you okay? Like, and he was like, no, it's just like sometimes like, he's like, it's not that you're boring, it's just that my brain sometimes gets bored. I have ADHD. I'm like, no, say no more. You have ADHD. Like, if your brain gets bored, I would rather you do that than sit and not be learning anything for the rest of class trying to stay still. The other day, I had a student who was just, I could see, she had something happen before my class, and I could see her amping up. Like, I could see her physical body. I had her go push a wall. Now, granted, early childhood, right? And that is what I would have told one of my 2-year-old students to do, and the relationship I have with this student allows for me to tell her to go push a wall. But part of that is having that relationship with her to be able to know that I can tell the student to go push a wall. She pushed a wall for 5 minutes, came back, good as gold. But again, that's because I know this student. And what I teach in early childhood with helping children learn to manage their own emotions, that is something she can take into the classroom with her. Learning about executive function. So yesterday, did any of you come? I know you came to Angela's session. Did anyone else come to Angela's session? So executive function, learning about executive function and ways to learn. And one of the things when I got to Triton that surprised me, because this was not something I had when I was adjuncting, students didn't know how to study when I got here. So I had to teach them how to study my things. And the first time around, it was mostly, here's what works for me. And then once I got that under control, it's like, all right, here's what I've heard works for other individuals. And trying it in the classroom. I make them make a lot of posters because a lot of my students, even though they say they're not artists, make these lovely posters explaining Vygotsky's theory of social learning, describing why the terrible twos aren't terrible twos but terrific twos, but using the textbook, using our articles to embed that all in there, but giving them a way that isn't just the stare at this book and study, because that doesn't work for everyone, and especially with the way technology is changing, this is my personal concern, I am curious and concerned about how this will affect our future learners when we're trying to teach using traditional textbooks. That's just a curiosity I have. If anyone has any ideas, let me know after this. Flexible learning approaches kind of go with that. Something that I do is in my syllabus, I will put, if you have an idea for how you want to do this assignment, please let me know and we'll discuss if it meets the rubric. For some of you, you can't do that because you have research papers that are very specific and they have to learn how to write a research paper. Like, that's non-negotiable. At some point in your life, you have to learn how to do it, whether or not you use it in your career, but you have to learn how to know research and use research. I know you mentioned at some point you had to learn every tree, which is kind of impressive because, like, I look at a tree and go, yeah, that's a tree. Huh? Those are maples? Norway maples. Now, see, that's all I'm going to think when I walk out there. And being self-aware. Most of our students are self-aware in a way that they're self-conscious. Does that make sense? Where it's like, I'm nervous, I'm taking up too much space because I'm everywhere. Versus like, oh, I have awareness of my abilities. I have awareness of what I need to learn. And a lot of times, at least for my students here, I've noticed that there is a very tragic narrative of students coming into my classroom and being like, all right, I'm here, tell me what you want me to do. And I'm like, no critical thinking, no flexible thinking, just very self-defeated, rather than here's what I know coming into your classroom, and here's what I know I need to do to learn. And that's something that and I'm lucky because I teach early childhood, I can use emotional regulation techniques for 2-year-olds that they can use in the classroom in the future. I talk about executive function because they're going to be work with children whose executive function is not there at all. So I'm lucky because I can scaffold all of this into my learning. Little Bugatti there for you if you got that. If you didn't, that's fine. It's an early childhood joke or an education joke. And one of the biggest things with trauma-informed teaching is approaching with curiosity and reflective listening. So listening to what's happening and being curious about it, not just being like, oh, your experience was this, so therefore, sorry, I'm distracted by the people walking by. So my train of thought left the station and is not making it to the station that I wanted to go to. Let me try that again. So listening to what's happening and not just assuming what's happening behind the scenes. Because I know sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, like I'm not standing up here pretending like I'm perfect at this. Because sometimes I'll like read a homework assignment from a student and I'm like, you just didn't do it. Even though I try to use trauma-informed teaching. I still have to step back from that. Well, it depends on my frustration level for the day and if I need to emotionally regulate myself. But approaching with curiosity, and it's an online class sending a student a message saying, hey, I saw that you submitted this. Can you tell me more about it? Where was your brain? What was going on? Or in class, because I talked to the student after who's pushing the wall. Okay, I noticed that you just seemed very, I mean, this is my interpretation of it, so please don't think I'm labeling you, but your reactions to me seemed very agitated today, whether or not they were or not. What was going on? And she was like, no, agitated is the right word. She told me all about things that were happening. And I was like, well, I can't fix that. But we can talk about some more emotional regulation things if you would like. And one of the things, and again, I have the benefit of this because of my content that I teach, is we have a guidance class where we're talking about children with challenging behaviors, where a child does something. How many of you have kids? I guess we should ask that. How many times has your kid pissed you off?
And today, or?
And is it the behavior, or is there something behind the behavior? And that's something I talk to my students about, is it happens for adults too, where sometimes we're looking at something and going, why? But the reality is that we should be asking, oh, why, what's going on? What happened? Why? In a way that's not like the, the tone difference of why you're doing that, which according to John Mulaney just means you stop doing that. Versus the inquisitive, like, hey, I actually want you to answer, and I actually want to understand why you're struggling with this assignment. Because if I understand why you're struggling with this assignment, maybe it's just that you haven't talked it out loud, and you just need to talk about it out loud, and we can move on from there. Or maybe there's something going on, like with my student with homelessness. She needs a place to study. So for me, that was, okay, I can open up my tinkering lab during my office hours and have a place for you to study. So, and obviously that's the benefit that I had. I'm not saying that you have to open up your offices for students to study in, but if that's the solution to the problem and you can accommodate that, that's an easy solution to accommodate, right? So a lot, I guess I boil it down, trauma-informed teaching is just approaching with curiosity and being mindful. It's not the whole business of like putting the headers at the top of your syllabus saying, warning, content may be disturbing for some viewers. That's a whole different conversation. Trauma-informed approach is just approaching with mindfulness, taking care of yourself, which is critical, and curiosity. Questions? I spend a lot of time talking. I was hoping to let you talk more. And then this was the last time, but I shared a bunch of books, podcasts. Some of them I've listened to. 2 of them I've heard are good. I can't get through them. The 2 on the right are the 2 that I can't get through. I still do that. I'm going to be honest. Like, I can't in my life anymore. Notebook LM, AI. made it more, this is from the first part, so if you don't want to scroll throughout the slides, it did mess up some of the numbers, so links to resources, yeah. And it's like 4 o'clock, I'm almost on the dot, so.